That's right, beyond technical. So we'll talk very little about technical stuff. In fact, we'll talk a lot about things that are beyond the technical stuff. All right, so I am Emmanuelle Wintergerst. I'm the host of this event. I'm currently the director for engineering capability development at Instacluster, but today I'm not representing Instacluster. I'm also an engineer. I graduated in France in automation engineering. I worked a few years in the car industry, in Germany mostly, and then I came to Australia. In Australia, I found out that there is very little automotive industry to speak of, so I had to rethink my career. In Australia, then I became a fellow of the Institution of the Engineers of Australia, Engineers Australia, and I became chartered in leadership and management. I then steered my career into leadership, workforce development, assessments, and I kind of became fascinated with the way people learn and the way they develop, and trying to apply a rational framework on what makes a person the person you want to keep. How do you detect potential? How do you nurture that potential? Turns out there are a lot of engineering methods and analytical thinking that you can apply to that. So that led me to exploring the concept of skills and capabilities and development frameworks and things like that, which is something I'm very excited to talk to you about today. So today I'll talk about the capabilities to enhance your career, the beyond technical, even though we got technical difficulties today, and that's all right. So when you think about your career, how far do you think about it? How far do you go? Do you go 2 years down the track? Do you go 5 years down the track? Do you like to be really prepared and think about what's going to happen in 10 years, 20 years in the future? And if you do, what does it look like? The future of your job or the future of your career? Wouldn't you like to know? When you think about your career, wouldn't you want to really know in advance what you are going to need to do to get to that point? And that's really hard to know. We've got COVID that came a little bit out of the blue. It forced many of us to work remotely. We got technology that is not coming out of the blue, but it's really disrupting many workplaces. We got automation replacing humans more and more. So how do you keep progressing? How do you get that next job? How do you get that next promotion? Or do you seize that next opportunity when you don't know what it's going to look like? So don't you want to be future-proof? I certainly do. And if you do too, then believe me, you're not the only one. There is a study from the Foundation for Young Australians that highlights that 60% of students currently studying are actually being they are being trained in jobs that will be completely changed by automation. So they're basically training for jobs that will no longer exist by the time they finish their studies. I'm pretty sure these students, they would like to know what the future looks like. There is another report from the World Economic Forum, and it's called the Future of Jobs 2020, the Future of Jobs Report 2020. It states that 40% of the current workforce are expected to change in the next 5 years. And in the next 5 years, that's actually fairly soon. They probably want to know what the future holds too. What kind of skills will people need to change so that they can keep going? So that's in fact the question that for most economies in most countries, so for us in Australia, but in the US, in India, in Africa, Europe, everywhere, you name it, they're all asking that same question. What does the future of work look like? So there are a lot of organizations from the economic sector, like the World Economic Forum, the education sectors, universities, of course, they have a vested interest in trying to build up the best programs they can for students to be job ready when they finish their studies. Professional organizations are looking into that as well. There are many others that are dedicating their expertise to trying to answer that very question. What does the future of work look like? So there are a number of reports that I will quote from. The World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report is one of my favorite sources. I'm pretty sure we can find a way to give you all the references that of interest. There is a list at the end of this presentation, but probably we can post it somewhere down the track if you want to look into it. So there are lots and lots of reports that are about that. What kind of skills will people need in the future to be able to be future-proof, really? And they're all written by all sorts of very smart people whose job it is to actually look into that. So I'm not going to reinvent the wheel. What do all these very smart people say? Funnily enough, they kind of all say the same thing. They say work as we know it is changing. So that means as a professional, you are going to spend a lot of time right there. What do you really do? And this is going to change. And I'm picking on programmers right here. If there are programmers in the room, no offense intended, but that's true for everybody. The work is changing and we don't really know what it's going to look like, but we can try and get prepared better to be future-proof. So let's go and listen or read about what all these smart people have written in their reports. They all say, work as we know it is changing. They say some jobs will disappear completely, and that's coming as no surprise, right? It's already happening. How many supermarket checkout people are being replaced by automated checkout now? That's happening all the time. Very unsurprisingly, they also say the common thread and the reason for a lot of these changes are digitization of things and automation of jobs. So the bottom line is, more than ever, you'll need to upskill, keep your skill up to date all the time. You'll need to not be afraid to reskill, because sometimes your job is just going to disappear. And above all else, you'll need to be able to adapt all the time. So what's the good news? There are good news. That's always good. The good news is IT skills are and will remain in demand. Most of these changes are due to automation and digitization, right? So it kind of makes sense that IT skills are still very, very on demand, very, very in. So if you're an IT specialist, and I believe that here at Codementor, a lot of interested people in the audience would be dealing with IT specialists or be IT specialists themselves. So you are probably already equipped with some of the right tools to be better prepared for the future. However, the less good news, it's not exactly a bad news, but it's the less good news. It is the technical expertise is no longer enough. There is IT personnel everywhere, but they are now expected to have a much wider panel of skills. It ranges from communication and collaboration, leadership and business acumen, customer focus. If you're self-employed, you know that better than anyone. You've already had to do a little bit of everything just to get your own company running. If you're a student, you're probably seeing that in your studies. Now, there is a lot more focus on what people sometimes call the soft skills, the communication skills, things like that. So if you want to be that person who gets promoted, that person who gets the next opportunity, the next great project, you'll need to develop a much broader range of skills. So your technical expertise is what gets you a foot in the door, but it's not what allows you to develop your career. It's a given, you need it, and all your colleagues are going to have it. But to get to the next step, you need more than that. So we'll look at the World Economic Forum report again, my favorite report. They published the top 10 of skills for 2025, and that's very soon. And that list has analytical thinking, innovation, active learning. Active learning is really important. Complex problem solving, simple problem solving, computers can do most of the time, but complex problem solving, that's still a very human thing to do. Critical thinking and critical analysis. Creativity, originality, initiative, very human things to do. Leadership and social influence, technology use, monitoring, and control. Finally, we've got a word about technology there. Technology design and programming, that's a good news, that's good to hear. Resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. This is echoing a little bit this idea that work is changing and people will need to adapt all the time. Reasoning, problem solving, and ideation. So note how few of these are actually really directly technology focused. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. The technical skills, they're relatively straightforward to acquire. They're not easy to acquire, not necessarily, but they're straightforward. There is someone somewhere who has done how, someone who knows how to do these things. Someone has documented it. There are books, there are videos, there are probably YouTube tutorials for some things. There are many ways you can access this information. That kind of knowledge usually has rules that are defined and well established. So maybe you'll need to start at the basics again. So if you wanted to learn how to code, you might have to learn algorithmics first, and then logic, and then focus on a specific language. But it's doable. There is a lot of documentation. The knowledge base is there. You probably can find a degree, some kind of education to do that. You can do it on your own. It's more or less difficult, but it is straightforward. So we know that technology is changing. But when you focus on the technological skill, you learn it, you practice it, and eventually, hopefully, you become good at it. Because technology is changing, we're used to that. So you learn something, it changes, there is an update, a new tech, a new programming language, a new version of Ansible or Docker or whatever you use, you learn it. So technical skills are more likely to become obsolete very quickly, but we're used to that, so we adapt and we learn the new things all the time. The other skills on those lists, though, they are less likely to be easily replaced by computers or automation. I'm not saying that's impossible, because AI is progressing as a quite incredible rate, really, but it's not in your near future. So it makes sense that these become more and more on demand. They're also a little bit more difficult to learn to an extent, because they don't have those really well-defined roles and pre-existing bases. They are more related to human attributes, to your human skills. So what do we do? I mean, this is scary. We'll need to skill all the time. We need broader skills range. Maybe we'll need to change career. We'll need to adapt all the time. That sounds exhausting. So what do we do now? One of the answers is probably not the only one, but one of the answers is that you develop your capabilities. So what that? Capabilities, to explain, let's take it a step back and let's have a little break. And like a good Australian, when I take a little break, I like to talk about sports. So I don't know if you noticed, but some really famous athletes, they're very famous for one sport, but very often they're also good at another sport, sometimes different sports. Sometimes they're also good at an international level in these other sports. So we have cyclists doing bobsleigh, and NFL players doing basketballs, and baseball players getting into cricket. And in Australia, just a few days ago, our very own Ash Barty was showing off her amazing golfing skills shortly after announcing she was retiring from tennis, right? So it's not quite uncommon. Often when you're a very high athlete in one field, you can get pretty good at a different sport. So let me give you a couple of more precise examples. That's Rafael Nadal. Won many tennis tournaments. He just snapped his 21st Grand Slam at the Australian Open just a few months ago. He was ranked #1 world tennis player for more than 200 weeks. That's pretty good. We can all agree that he's a pretty competent tennis player, certainly better than I. And here, that is Kelly Slater. He's also quite famous in his field. He's collected a record 11 World Surfing Champion title, and he's been called arguably the best surfer of all times. He's a pretty decent surfer too. Now, these two are technical experts of their own rights, one for tennis and the other for surfing. Tennis and surf don't have much in common as far as sports go. One's on land, the other is on water. One involves running after a ball armed with a racket, and the other one is about standing on a board. We have a Kelly Slater eponymous. That's interesting. I hope he's surfing too, maybe not as good. So tennis and surf, that's kind of as different as it goes, right? But you know what these two at least have in common? They have something interesting in common. They are both excellent golfers. So Nadal has a 0.3 handicap, which is, well, pretty much as high as you can go for an amateur. Slater has a 2.8 handicap. That's also pretty good. So why is that? I mean, golf, it has also very little to do with tennis and or surfing, right? So why are they both so good at a sport that has very little to do with the discipline they're known for? And they're both two different, very different athletes. Well, one way to explain that is to say that whilst these sports are quite different in nature, they still draw on common underlying attributes. So what do we need to have to be good at tennis? I'd say focus. That's probably also good for surfing, by the way. So we need endurance, like running on the field all the time. It's pretty hard. It's probably useful for surfing too. We'll need other things like speed or strength or hand-eye coordination. So now, if I look at surfing, we already have focus and endurance. We probably need balance, and we probably need to have some kind of affinity with water, right? Because if you don't have that, why are you surfing in the first place? Some kind of flexibility. There are many more, but for the sake of this exercise, let's stop there. Now, these are our capabilities, and you can see they are not specific to any sport. They can be trained different way. I mean, endurance is not specific to tennis or surfing. So if we add golf to the equation, how does it compare? Focus is probably useful. So would be endurance, strength, balance, coordination, flexibility. I don't know about how you play golf, but speed, I don't think plays a great role. And unless I got the golf thing really wrong, the water thing is not useful for golf at all. But still, a lot of these attributes that they're using each for their own sport is also using for golf. So in this context, our technical experts, the tennisman and the surfer, are drawing on the same capabilities, and these capabilities are like the building blocks for their own technical skills and expertise. So at this point, I'll make a disclaimer. It's not because you're good at tennis that you'll automatically be good at golf, or vice versa, or surfing for that matter. You also need to train and practice, and none of that happens automatically, right? But being good and having trained for one sport is going to make it easier for you to learn another one and possibly be really good really quickly. These capabilities, they have a few important things in common. First, they are not specific to a sport in particular. They can be useful, as we've just seen, for different sports, some of them very different. Second, they can be trained and developed in a variety of ways, not necessarily by training for that specific sport. These athletes probably develop their endurance by running or doing cardio, not necessarily only by doing tennis or surfing or golf for that matter. And third, they are human attributes. They are not relying on a tool or an external factor. Their focus is not going to change much depending on whether they have a good racket or a bad racket, or a good surfboard or a bad surfboard. So they're very intrinsically human kind of attributes. So why is that all relevant to you? We can apply the same kind of reasoning to your own technical expertise. So like our athletes, all technical experts regardless of their disciplines. They make use of capabilities. Some of these capabilities are different, but quite a few are common across disciplines and expertise. You develop the capabilities that are useful for the things you do, or if you are a student, the things you're learning. And some of the capabilities are going to make it much easier for you to learn new skills. And the better you are at these, the greater chance you will have to be good at the next skill, and you'll be better at adapting. So really, to go back to the question about what are capabilities, we can sum it up by saying they are human attributes that are independent from a professional context. They're highly transferable. They can be developed in a variety of ways, and they are human factors, not relying on a tool. So you probably have heard about skills, and very often the word skills and capabilities, including in my favorite World Economic Forum report, they kind of used interchangeably. And we can argue on this all day, but in the context of this presentation, I split the skills from the capabilities in that skills are usually described within the context of the activity. For example, you can have excellent Python programming skills, so you're good at programming and you know Python very well. But a capability related to that would be problem solving or analytical thinking or logical thinking. So capabilities are in a sense more basic, more like building blocks. So what are the capabilities that are relevant for you? What kind of capabilities are we talking about here? We are talking about things like communication and collaboration and critical skills and problem solving, strategic thinking, social awareness, customer focus, creativity, innovation, your approach to lifelong learning, etc., etc., etc. There are so many of them, it's enough to give anyone a headache. But most importantly, these are all things you use, whether you're an accountant or a programmer or a florist, use them differently and you use them at different level of complexity, but they are independent from the actual work you're doing. So there was someone who was saying all these are required to a programming career, and that's very true. This is very true. That's exactly the point of this talk. Now, most of the time, you might be using them without realizing. There are a lot of reports out there that would highlight some more than other, but for different reasons. So how do you decide which one is the right set of capabilities? Well, that really depends on who you are, the profession you're in, where you want to go next. You need to think about what you do every day or in your studies, whether you're leading a team, what your team members are doing. But if you're employed in a medium or big company, chances are you have some kind of performance expectation framework. This is usually a good place to start. But if you don't, or if you think your performance framework is not super helpful, here is a set of capabilities that the very smart people I was talking about before I've highlighted in many different reports. So this is a subset of the capabilities highlighted in reports by the World Economic Forum, the Institute of Working Future in Australia, the SOFIA framework, if you're familiar with that, the Australian Council of Deans, who are doing a lot of work on that as well, the International Engineering Alliance, who has been working on it for some years now. Put all those links in reference. So things like problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity are about the way you think. Things like ethics and lifelong learning, they're about the way you behave. Adaptability and leadership is the way you lead. And by that, I don't mean the way you manage others. It's the way you apply leadership to your own behavior, whether you are leading others or just yourself. You may be leading others just by being there and doing the right thing all the time. And the third one is communication, customer focus, and collaboration. And it's about the way you interact with others. So those are key. They have been highlighted in many different research as the skills and capabilities that are going to endure the future, the changes, and they are going to make it easier for you to adapt to change, to be resilient, to be flexible, to be future-proof. The beauty of these capabilities is that you can train, you can develop these quite independently from your actual work. You may not be able to find a course for communication for tech ops working on a Linux platform, right? That's too specific. But you will find a plethora of communications training, and the base principles are the same. You will find training and methods for critical thinking, or to enhance creativity, or to be more agile, or develop your understanding of ethics. So you can do all of that outside of the context of your own work. So your technical expertise, it will almost inevitably become obsolete. But if you have a good attitude towards lifelong learning, you will be able to keep up, to upskill all the time, to get the new changes, the new things. And this is how a lot of IT specialists go on every day. They keep up with the changes in technology. That's one of the challenges and also one of the exciting things, isn't it? So, for example, if your technical expertise is excellent, but you're not a good communicator, you won't be able to explain things to others or train others or document what you're doing or deal with customers, explain the reasons behind your technical decision. If you're one of the decision maker in a big project, for example, you won't be able to collaborate efficiently with your colleague, things like that. Now, let's try and give you a real life example. Say you are working as a sysadmin or maybe a DevOps kind of role, and you have a performance framework, and your performance expectations say that you need to prioritize your tickets based on urgency, complexity, and customer value. Now, to do that, you need your technical expertise. Else, how would you know what's in a ticket? But you prioritize. You need to use your problem solving, and to determine which one goes first. It's part of your problem solving abilities. You are expected to do it without being asked all the time. So that's your agency, your ability to act and do things. You do it based on urgency, not based on your own feelings. So that's a bit of your ethical framework or your professional conduct. To determine whether something is really urgent or your customer is only saying so because they want to be first in the queue, that's your critical thinking. You need your analytical thinking to analyze complexity. You need to be customer focused to determine what value it has for the customer. And you need a little bit of business acumen just to know whether something is valuable or not. So you do apply all these capabilities, these building blocks for your skills at different levels. Now, the level below that might be do the tickets as they are assigned to you. So you would need lesser critical and analytical thinking, probably no business acumen at that level. The level above might say that you need to do all that, plus assign the tickets to people based on their own abilities. So you need to have more critical thinking and more analytical thinking, plus more collaboration and more communication. So let's do another one. Identify and address gaps and inaccuracies in documentation. Pretty much all the jobs have something about documentation, and nobody likes to do documentation, but still you need to do it. So also you need your technical expertise, else why are you even there? But to identify it, you need to think analytically, you need your problem solving to address the gaps, you need to do it in a professional way rather than saying that you've seen it and then pretend you didn't. So that's your ethic. You need to do it without being asked. That's your agency. Critical thinking for your inaccuracies. Documentation is usually written, not always, but that's communication. And you usually document for others. So that's part of your ability to collaborate. So see how some of them seem to come back. That's normal, and that's why these attributes are highlighted in the research, because they come back all the time. So if I go back to the subset that are here written in the corners, these capabilities are key to future-proofing your career. They will support your technical expertise. They will ensure that you stay up to date. They will support your own performance and your own behavior. So don't think these are only side skills that you might develop, maybe if you get some time someday. Next time you get an opportunity to do a communications training or creative thinking course, don't dismiss it as being irrelevant to you or not right now, or I don't have time. The things you will learn, they will enhance your own skills at a fundamental level, just by influencing the way you think, the way you behave, the way you interact with others. It is extremely relevant to everything you do as a technical expert. So developing the skills, developing habits aligned with the skills. So that's, for example, learning becomes a habit rather than a chore. So that leadership just becomes your standard attitude, not just something managers have to do more or less well. That are the things that are going to give you the best chances for your career. So really, this is the end of the talk. I hope you found it interesting, and thank you very much for listening, and I'll be happy to answer questions if you have any. So these are the references if anyone is interested. Maybe I'll try to post them on the event site if that's of interest. Q&A box. What would you say as your biggest difficulty in your career life? That's a good question. I think for me, it has been adaptability, to be flexible enough to adapt to different situations. I migrated several times. I changed countries several times, and every time I had to adapt to new ways of thinking, new ways of working, new ways of learning what was the common standard in this place. Every time I had to do it in a language that was not my own native language. So that has been a little bit of a challenge. You probably noticed by now that I still have a very strong French accent. There are very good reasons for that, but my first job was actually in Germany, so I had to work in German. Those difficulties, though, I was able to overcome them by learning a lot very, very quickly, by communicating a lot with others, trying to find support, information, things like that. I try to apply as much leadership as I can, and I try to find mentors and people to help me. But being flexible and adapt has been interesting because things change, and some of it was because I chose it. But a lot of us have to deal with change that are independent from your own choosing. So if you are in a situation where you are kind of scared of that change, that's normal. Change is a little bit scary. But if you prepare for that change, where you say, well, every change might be an opportunity, whether I wanted that change or not, you can prepare for it. You can use all those capabilities I described before to be more ready and less scared. Thank you very much for joining in today. I enjoyed the talk. I hope you enjoyed it too. What resource would you recommend to improve on the skill set? There are heaps and heaps of resources available, but things like LinkedIn Learning is always a good place to start. Coursera has heaps and heaps of really interesting material. If you're in Australia, there is a program called Job Trainer, where there's a lot of qualifications and courses that are sponsored. If you're not in Australia, I'm not necessarily across everything, but there is a lot of micro-learning kind of education modules that are available everywhere. Another way to do that is to find a coach, because that's really helping for those type of skills. How do you manage your learning and not become a jack of all trades? Well, that depends. Some people want to be a jack of all trade, and for example, in the tech ops world, that's very highly prized. If you want to become a specialist, that's a little bit different. So when you learn in breadth and in depth. You choose whether you want to develop in breadth or in depth. You choose whatever learning is suitable for you. So if you want to develop your expertise in depth, you are going to opt for advanced modules on some things. But you also need to keep an eye on the trends, because if the technology, the specific things that you are actually putting so much effort in being an expert on, may become completely obsolete. And this is where you need to be a little bit mindful of developing other things on the side. So try not to put all your eggs in the same basket if you want, because by becoming a specialist at a very high level of expertise, you will have benefits, that's for sure, and better recognition. But the higher you go, the dire the places are. And if ever that technology becomes obsolete, then you need to have something to fall back on. So I would recommend develop as a specialist if you like, but don't put your eggs in all in the same basket. So maybe develop in 2 or 3 technologies that would make sense together. But if one of them goes out of fashion or is no longer in use, you have the other 2 to fall back on. Thank you and have a lovely rest of the day.